What if the fate of an entire civilization rested on a message, one that was never read, never spoken, and never delivered? What if the answer to one of history's most puzzling collapses was hanging from a thread, literally? They say the Inca Empire was one of the greatest in human history, sprawling across the Andes, masterfully engineered, rich in gold and mystery. But what they don't say, or maybe don't want to say, is how it all unraveled so fast. Some blame disease, others say it was the Spanish, but there's a tale whispered among Andean ruins and buried in the forgotten archives of conquistadors about a final message, a warning, a plea, or maybe a curse, a message that never arrived. Let's begin with a paradox. The Inca ruled over an empire larger than imperial Rome at its height, stretching over 2,500 miles from modern-day Colombia down to Chile. They built roads longer than the Roman network, suspended bridges across bottomless gorges, and governed over 10 million people. And they did it all without a written language, at least not one we can read. Instead of ink and parchment, the Inca used something called the Quipu, a system of knotted strings made of llama wool, alpaca hair, or cotton. At first glance, it looks like a child's toy, but in truth, it was the beating heart of an empire. Think of it as the Inca internet, census data, tax records, troop movements, food stores, all encoded into elaborate systems of knots, twists, colors, and lengths. Each city and region had its own Quipucamayok, knot keeper, an elite class of record keepers trained from childhood to memorize what each configuration meant. Some Quipus are clearly numerical. We can read them like ancient spreadsheets, but others refuse to be understood. No numbers, just strings, symbols, messages encrypted so well we still have no idea what they say. And one of them, some historians argue, carried the most important message the empire ever tried to send, the one that never reached its destination. The Inca had no wheels, no horses, no written script, and yet they managed something nearly miraculous, a communication system faster than many medieval European kingdoms. Their secret? The chasquis, relay runners. Trained from a young age to run through thin mountain air at high altitudes, the chasquis operated like human telegram lines. Positioned every few miles along the 25,000-mile Inca road network, they passed on oral messages, small goods, or quipus in rapid relay. A message could travel from Cusco to Quito in just 5 days. That's faster than a Spanish army could march. And one of these runners, legend has it, was entrusted with a quipu unlike any other. It was rushed out of Cusco in the early 1530s, during the first days of chaos as the Spanish began their conquest. Its destination is lost to time, its contents never decoded. Some believe it was a warning to a distant general. Others say it contained instructions to hide or destroy the Inca's sacred treasures. A few fringe theorists even claim it was a prophecy, foretelling the end of the empire or the return of a savior. But none of that matters, because the message never arrived. To understand what happened, we need to rewind. In 1532, the Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro landed on the Peruvian coast with fewer than 200 men. On the surface, it was a suicide mission. The Inca Empire, at its peak, had millions. Pizarro had guns, yes, but they were slow and inaccurate. His greatest weapons weren't technological. They were psychological. Atahualpa, the last sovereign emperor of the Inca, had just emerged victorious from a brutal civil war against his brother Huascar. The empire was fragile, bleeding, divided. And into this storm rode the bearded strangers, wearing armor, mounted on beasts never before seen in the Andes. To the Inca, these invaders weren't just foreign, they were otherworldly. Some believed they were gods foretold by prophecy, others, demons. But nearly all of them underestimated what 200 men could do with steel, deception, and religious fervor. The Spanish ambushed Atahualpa in the town of Cajamarca. The emperor came unarmed, expecting diplomacy. Instead, he was seized, his guards slaughtered, and his court dismantled. In captivity, Atahualpa promised Pizarro a room filled with gold and silver. Literally, a ransom so enormous it would be worth billions today. The Spaniards took the treasure, then killed him anyway. And while all this unfolded far from the capital, a lone chasqui was running.
No record tells us the exact day the message left, but many historians believe it was shortly after Atahualpa's capture. The high priests and military generals of Cusco realized the empire's central command was paralyzed. Without the emperor, without direct orders, chaos would spread. Resistance needed coordination. The army needed orders. Sacred objects needed hiding. Secrets needed preserving. So they summoned a Quipucamayoc. He was no ordinary record keeper. Some say he was a priest of the old gods, fluent in the Quipu's deeper forgotten layers. Not just data, but prophecy, myth, instruction. The Quipu he tied that day wasn't for taxes or census. It was a coded message, desperate, urgent, and it was handed to a chasqui, anonymous to history, and sent into the mountains toward the Inca outposts beyond Spanish reach. But the message never got there. What happened next is the subject of fierce debate. Some say the chasqui was intercepted by a Spanish patrol and executed on the spot, the strange knotted strings dismissed as superstition. Others think the runner lost his way in the treacherous Andes, slipping into a ravine swallowed by snow and silence. There's even a darker theory, that the message reached its destination, but was too late or too dangerous. The recipient, realizing the empire was doomed, may have destroyed the Quipu, along with everything it contained, but there's another possibility, one far more intriguing. In 2010, archaeologists working near Vilcabamba, the last stronghold of the Inca resistance, uncovered a cave sealed with ritual stones. Inside, they found ceremonial pottery, weapons, and what appeared to be a preserved quipu. It didn't match the local records. It bore strange patterns, non-numerical, unlike tax registers. The fibers were dyed in colors rarely used together. Some of the knots were reversed, mirrored, intentionally obscured. The artifact was shipped to a university lab in Lima. And then, nothing. It vanished from public records, no publications, no announcements, just silence. Some believe that Quipu was the message, the one meant to alter history. And if that's true, someone didn't want us to read it. Here's the part most people miss. The Inca didn't separate the practical from the spiritual. Their math was sacred. Their astronomy was political. Their quipus weren't just tools, they were portals. The act of tying one was a ritual, a transfer of knowledge, a communion with ancestors. If the lost message contained prophecy, it might not have been linear. It might have described the fall of the empire the way the stars describe planting seasons, cyclically, metaphorically, encoded through color, tension, and shape. Modern linguists have been trying to crack these narrative quipus for years. A 2022 study suggested that quipus might include grammatical syntax, not clusters acting like verbs and nouns. Another theory connects them to Quechua oral poetry, matching patterns of rhythm and breath. But decoding a dead language without a Rosetta Stone, it's like trying to reconstruct a symphony from a single broken violin string. And yet, we keep searching, because buried somewhere in these knots, possibly sealed in a cave or hidden in a museum drawer, mislabeled as miscellaneous, might be the final words of an empire, a warning, a farewell, a secret never meant for Spanish eyes. After the fall of Cusco in 1533, the Spanish believed the Inca were finished. They were wrong. The empire retreated into the jungle, literally. From deep within the cloud forests of the Andes, a new capital emerged, Vilcabamba, the last stronghold of resistance. For nearly 40 years, it became the beating heart of a phantom empire, one that refused to die, ruled by a ghost lineage of Sapa Incas, untouched by Spanish hands. But what really happened in Vilcabamba, the Spanish couldn't find it, not for decades. And during that time, something strange unfolded. The Incas began disappearing, not just as a culture, but as a presence. Entire communities melted into the forest. Roads were intentionally destroyed, bridges burned, Quipu vanished, and so did the message, or so the Spanish believed. Jump ahead to the early 1600s. A Peruvian indigenous scholar named Felipe Guaman Poma de Ayala wrote a massive 1,200-page letter to the King of Spain detailing the crimes of colonial officials and the history of the Inca world. It's a stunning document, one that blends Catholic doctrine with Incan cosmology, Andean myth with Spanish politics. But among its pages is something most scholars skip over, a drawing. It shows an Inca priest holding what looks like a quipu, not for census or tax, but held above a flame in a gesture of offering or destruction. In his annotations, Guaman Poma hints at messages the old world still guards and knots made for ears not of this land. Was he referring to the final message? Was he warning the king or threatening him? It's hard to say, but Guaman Poma's manuscript mysteriously disappeared for over 300 years, reappearing in a Danish library only in the early 1900s. Why Denmark? Why hidden? Theories abound. Some say it was smuggled out by monks who feared it contained heresy, or dangerous truths about how the Inca had truly resisted conquest. Some go even further, that the manuscript is a cipher in itself, and that embedded within its illustrations are visual clues to a Quipu still waiting to be deciphered. A final message not made of knots, but ink. Here's where things get even stranger. In 1572, the Spanish finally found and destroyed Vilcabamba. They captured and executed the last Inca emperor, Tupac Amaru. With him, they claim, died the final ember of the Inca civilization. But scroll through the colonial archives and something doesn't add up. In 1584, a secret memo between two Spanish governors warned of movements in the highlands, of messages passed between old bloodlines and symbols left on roads that no one but the natives understand. This wasn't ordinary gossip. These were trained colonial officers describing Quipu-like cords being found near rebel camps, attached to rocks, trees, even hidden in village altars. It's as if someone, or some group, was still using quipus to coordinate something long after the empire fell, a rebellion or something else entirely. The Spanish were terrified of the quipus, not because they understood them, but because they couldn't. To them, it was witchcraft, pagan relics, evidence of demonic power, so they did what all conquerors do when faced with things they fear, they burned them. In 1583, the Third Council of Lima officially banned all quipus and ordered every surviving Quipucamayoc to turn over their work or face execution. Thousands were killed, quipus were incinerated in mass bonfires, some were thrown into rivers, others were buried under churches. The destruction was so complete that out of tens of thousands of quipus that must have existed, fewer than 1,000 survive today, and yet, every now and then, a new one surfaces. In 2005, villagers in the Ayacucho region uncovered a cave filled with textiles, pottery, and a small box of knotted cords sealed in beeswax. One of the cords bore an eerie resemblance to the ones drawn in Guaman Poma's manuscript. But here's the twist. The cave wasn't marked in Quechua. It was marked in a combination of symbols, including what looked like early glyphs, never before associated with the Inca. Were these the remains of a secret society, a priesthood in exile? Was the message still being protected? Modern scientists are beginning to rethink everything we thought we knew about the Quipu. For decades, the assumption was that Quipus could only store numerical data, but that was based on early colonial accounts, many of which were written by priests with no understanding of the system. New discoveries are changing that. In 2017, a team at Harvard's Quipu database project identified patterns in Quipus from different regions. These weren't just numbers, they followed linguistic rules, sentence structure, grammatical markers, even punctuation-like spacing. In other words, these weren't calculators, they were books. And if that's true, then narrative Quipus, like the one in the cave, or the one believed to be part of the lost message, could contain not just facts, but ideas, political manifestos, prophecies, secrets. But that raises a terrifying possibility. What if someone already decoded them and didn't tell the world? Back in the 1970s, a Peruvian historian named Dr. Arturo Peralta claimed he'd been allowed into a locked storage room beneath the church of Santo Domingo in Cusco, built atop the ruins of the Inca Temple of the Sun. What he found there, according to his notes, were over 24 Quipus untouched for centuries. Some were dyed in deep ceremonial reds, others knotted with gold thread. A few had tags in Spanish, no tocar, do not touch. Peralta published a short paper on his findings and was immediately discredited. His university revoked his credentials. The storage room was sealed. Later it was declared lost in a fire. But conspiracy theorists remain convinced that the church has known about the lost message all along, that one of those Quipus, possibly the one dispatched by the Chasqui in 1533, is in their possession. And they're keeping it hidden. Why? Maybe the message contains nothing. Or maybe it contains a history that contradicts everything we were told. Fast forward to the 21st century. In rural Andean communities, the Quipu is making a comeback, not as a tourist attraction, but as a cultural revival. New generations are relearning the knots. Indigenous scholars are building software to decode their syntax. And in some communities, old Quipus, buried for generations, are being brought back into the light. One such story comes from a village in Apurimac. In 2023, an elder woman died and left behind a sealed trunk. Inside were ceremonial garments, a staff, and a folded bundle of cotton cords. But these weren't the usual Quipus. The knots were layered, one string tied over another in complex loops. They resembled both numerical and symbolic forms, like the hybrids seen in only 2 known surviving specimens. The woman had no children, no apprentices, but according to neighbors, she often spoke of guarding a voice from the past and once claimed that when the stars return to their beginning, the chords will speak. What did she mean? Was this the message, or just a fragment of something much larger? Let's entertain a radical idea. What if the Inca message wasn't meant to arrive? What if it was meant to move? Like oral tradition, the Quipu was not static. It was untied, retied, retold, passed from hand to hand, memory to memory. What if the final message was designed to survive because it couldn't be delivered? A living system, an algorithm of resistance, an encrypted idea moving silently across time through ritual, through myth, through strings that whisper when no one is watching. Maybe the Chasqui didn't fail. Maybe he did exactly what was needed. Maybe the message never stopped running. To understand what the Inca may have truly encoded in their final Quipu, we must look backward, far backward. Before the Inca, there was Tiwanaku. Before Tiwanaku, there was Caral. These ancient Andean civilizations also used complex textiles and symbolic math, not to write stories, but to measure time. To the Andean mind, time was not linear, it was circular, spiraling like the knots on a string. Events didn't just happen, they returned. This worldview birthed a concept known as Pachacuti, the great turning of the world. Every 500 years or so, the universe would collapse and reassemble. Old empires would fall, new ones would rise. Balance would be restored, but at great cost. And according to some oral traditions, The Inca believed they were living at the end of a cycle, that Pizarro's arrival was not just invasion, but destiny. The Quipu sent during the conquest may not have been a warning in the military sense, but a time marker, a record of the turning world, a thread placed at the very center of collapse, a message to those who would come after. United States. There's a little-known story buried in the memoirs of a Spanish friar named Martín de Murúa. He spent decades in the Andes and was known to be unusually sympathetic to indigenous beliefs. In one passage, he describes meeting an old Inca priest who offered him a strange gift, a quipu made of human hair and dyed bone white. Murúa didn't know what to make of it. The priest said only this: "When the bells ring backwards, follow the knot." Murúa dismissed it until years later he heard rumors of Spanish settlers vanishing into the mountains, not being killed, joining, walking into the ruins of old temples and never coming back. Could it be that some conquistadors converted? That they saw in the Inca cosmology a truth deeper than what they brought with them? There are cryptic references in 17th century church records of heretical fraternities and new Jesuses of the Andes. Were they remnants of the message? New messengers? Among the most persistent rumors is something called the red thread theory, a conspiracy quietly passed between anthropologists, ethnographers, and codebreakers. The idea? That hidden among surviving quipus is a network of red-threaded cords that all trace back to one central quipu, the mother knot. This mother quipu, according to legend, contains the date of the true founding of the Inca Empire, not 1200 AD, but thousands of years before, a celestial alignment that signals the next Pachacuti. The location of the Pacha, a mythical device believed to be able to read quipus aloud by touch and vibration. This device is described in pre-Incan myths, an object made of gold and obsidian, shaped like a jaguar's paw, said to speak without breath. The last known reference to it appears in an 18th century map drawn by a Spanish explorer who went missing in the Vilcabamba jungle. On the map, in broken Latin and Quechua, he wrote, "Red cord, heart of the earth, sealed by blood." The map was dismissed as delirium, until in 1997, satellite imaging revealed a circular structure beneath the jungle canopy, shaped like a coiled rope, still unexcavated, still officially non-existent. The Chapac Ñan, the great Inca road, was not just infrastructure, it was a sacred grid said to mirror the stars. Along it, messages flowed like blood through veins. At its center, Cusco, the navel of the world. But some believe the true center wasn't Cusco. It was Choquequirao, the other Machu Picchu. Built high on a mountain saddle, Choquequirao has features no other Inca city has. Terraces aligned to the Milky Way, animal motifs only seen in pre-Incan Amazonian cultures. A hidden platform beneath the main temple with a tunnel blocked by an obsidian slab. In 2022, a Peruvian archaeologist leading a team at Choquequirao published a mysterious journal entry before vanishing on a solo trek. The strings lead here. I heard it in the wind like a breath through rope. It is not a message, it is a mirror. He was never found, only his journal. Some believe he finally found the last station of the Lost Chasqui, that the message, after 500 years, had returned to its origin. So what do we do with all this? We have no photographs of the original Quipu, no confirmed Chasqui body, no decoded prophecy, just whispers, broken strings, ghost trails. But perhaps that's the point. Maybe the message was never about content, but continuity. A civilization cut down mid-sentence, still trying to finish its thought. A message that refused to become silence. Today, indigenous scholars across South America are rebuilding the knowledge. Quechua is being taught again. Ceremonial weaving is being revived. Young Quipucamayaks are tying cords not for data, but for memory. One researcher recently described it best. The Inca didn't vanish. They went underground, and their words didn't disappear. They just stopped speaking in Spanish. And so we come back to the Chasqui, running alone through the Andes, carrying a Quipu whose meaning no one today can read, a message bound in knots, tightened by trembling fingers, perhaps soaked in blood or rain. He may have died, or delivered the message, or buried it so deep only time could decode it. Maybe it was found by rebels, or monks, or mountain winds. Maybe it still hangs in a cave waiting. Maybe it's been touched 1,000 times by people who thought it was just string. Or maybe, just maybe, it's being tied again right now by someone who never knew the original, but hears the echo and knows. The message never needed to be delivered, it just needed to survive. What if the greatest secrets of the past are not buried under earth, but hiding in plain sight, woven into the fabric of a people, encoded in ritual, whispered in a tongue that never died, only hushed? Maybe the message was never meant for them. Maybe it was always meant for us. If this story moved you, imagine how many others still wait to be uncovered, buried beneath silence, shadows, and stone. Subscribe to Chronicle Unknown. The forgotten world is still whispering, if you know how to listen.